Today's video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. And right now you can get this sweet Scoop Soldier sticker when you order over on cardkingdom.com. Just mention in your order notes that you want a Scoop Soldier sticker when you check out. Hey friends, Commander 2021 pre-constructed decks have been revealed, which means it's time for another round of my Precon upgrades. I'll go over how each pre-constructed deck plays, why you should buy it, analyze its strengths and weaknesses, and then use that information to recommend an optimal and impactful $50 upgrade. These videos are abbreviated versions of my upgrade articles, so if you're looking for a more in-depth guide to upgrading the deck, then check it out, link in the video description below. Today we're covering the Precon Lorehold Legacies, a white-red Artifact Reanimator deck. This Precon is packed with powerful artifacts that fill numerous roles in the deck, such as ramping with Solemn Simulacrum, blowing up permanents with Angel of the Ruins, and drawing cards off Combustible Gearhulk. The rest of the deck supports artifacts with powerful Sacrifice and Reanimator themes, sacrificing artifacts to get new ones with Audacious Reshapers, rummaging and reanimating artifacts with Duretti Scrap Savant, or mass reanimating all artifacts with Wake the Past. The end result is a unique Boros deck that grinds out the table with an unstoppable artifact value engine. The face commander of the deck, Osgir the Reconstructor, does a great job representing what the Precon is all about. The first ability lets you sacrifice artifacts for value and get extra beatdown damage, and the second ability is Supercharged Artifact Reanimation, exiling an artifact in your graveyard to make 2 token copies of it. This makes Osgir an insane value engine in the deck. Early on, you can sacrifice or discard cheap artifacts like Sol Ring, Ichor Wellspring, or even artifact lands like Ancient Den to ramp, and then later on make copies of huge game-winning bombs like Triplicate Titan, Bronze Guardian, and Mirror Battlesphere. Osgir is such a powerful and cool commander, so we're definitely keeping it in the command zone for the upgrade section. Alright, let's check out the deck list and see how well it accomplishes its goals. Right out of the box, Lorehold Legacies is incredibly focused on artifacts. I count 36 artifacts in the deck, plus a few non-artifact cards that create artifact tokens. There are also 19 cards that directly support artifacts as well. The deck's tight focus is one of its greatest strengths, making it incredibly consistent in advancing its goals. Now that we've glanced at the list as a whole, let's take a look at the deck's ratios. As I often explain in my Budget Commander videos, every time I build a rough draft of a deck, I use a checklist to make sure the deck has all of its fundamentals covered, such as mana, interaction, card advantage, and so on. This gives me a reference point to compare to the deck and see which areas may need improvement. My general ratio is 50 mana, lands and ramp, usually a 37-13 split, 10 card draw, cards that net you 2 or more cards in hand, 8 targeted removal, split between creature, artifact, enchantment removal, and counter magic, 3 board wipes, creature light decks might want 1 more, and creature heavy decks might want 1 less, 2 graveyard recursion, 2 flexible tutors, at higher budgets though I recommend more tutors, 1 graveyard hate, and 1 finisher, something that can win games the turn you cast it without too much setup. That's always my starting point, which is then tweaked to suit the individual deck strategy and further tweaks with playtesting. I always find this checklist immensely useful to figure out some quick ways to improve the deck in question. Now let's check out the rough ratios for Lorehold Legacies and how it compares. I count 51 mana, 38 lands, and 13 ramp, 6 card draw plus 4 looters, 15 targeted removal, so no worries about lacking interaction here, 3 board wipes, 8 graveyard recursion, 0 flexible tutors, 0 graveyard hate, and 3 finishers. The ratios look really good here at a glance. I prefer more card draw, but otherwise it checks most of my boxes. The next step is to analyze the individual cards, identifying the worst ones to swap out for our upgrades, which I do in the accompanying article linked in the video description below. But for this video, we're going to skip the card analysis and jump straight into the good stuff, the upgrades. So let's get started. First, we're going to add some tutors. We have access to a lot of powerful tutors in the artifact archetype, and adding some of them will let us consistently find the most powerful artifacts in our deck. So first we're adding in one of the best cards in the entire deck, Goblin Engineer. This can find any artifact card and put it into our graveyard, which we can recur later. And even the Goblin Engineer itself can also sacrifice and return an artifact of converted mana cost 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield, which is all fantastic. We're cutting out Pia Nalar for it, which it's a sack outlet, it lets big creatures go unblocked, but it just doesn't do enough in our deck. Next up, we're putting in Kuldotha Forgemaster. This requires sacrificing 3 artifacts, but again, our precon is all about sacrificing artifacts for value, and then we can find any artifact card and put it directly onto the battlefield, not just our hand. Which is pretty insane in our deck because we can find some really expensive artifacts and put them directly into play, which is amazing. We're going to be taking out Steel Overseer for it. Steel Overseer is neat in terms of a buff effect, but we're not really a go wide deck. We're mostly concentrated on 1 or 2 really big beaters, so Steel Overseer just doesn't do enough here. Next, we're putting in an underrated card that I don't think enough people talk about. This is Scrapyard Recombiner. Again, we can sacrifice an artifact to search our library for a construct card and put it into our hand, so this is a repeatable tutor, and you'd be surprised how many artifact creatures in our deck are actually constructs, so this can find a surprising amount of very sweet targets, including a brand new combo finisher that I'm introducing into the deck that I'll talk about later. And we're going to be taking out Dig Site Engineer for it. This is a new card and it's kind of neat, but it just doesn't do enough. It costs too much mana, the tokens are nice, but it's just too mana inefficient for what it does. So as you've been noticing, there's a big sacrifice and recursion theme in this precon that we're going to be enhancing. So first up, we're adding another staple to the deck, Goblin Welder. You can sacrifice an artifact for value and return a artifact from the graveyard to the battlefield. Not only is this great repeatable recursion and a sack outlet, but it also acts kind of as ramp because it lets you cheat into play huge mana value artifacts for a very low price. And we're going to be taking out Hellkite Igniter. This is a cool finisher in the deck, but there's no real way to cheat on its 7 mana value cost. And we can just replace it with artifacts as our finishers instead, which we can tutor up and cheat into play much easier. And to further enhance the sacrifice and recursion theme of this deck, we're going to be adding 3 artifacts that want to be sacrificed so they can recur things from our graveyard. First up, we're going to be adding Mere Retriever, which is amazing recursion and sacrifice fodder, the best of the 3. And we're going to be taking out Sanctum Gargoyle, which is basically just a worse version of Mere Retriever in our deck. It costs more mana, and we actually want to sacrifice a Retriever in the deck, and we have numerous ways of doing so, so it's all upside for the Retriever. Next up, we're going to be adding Junk Diver, which again, same thing as the Mere Retriever. It's an artifact that wants to be sacrificed and is really efficient recursion. And we're going to be taking out Feldon of the Third Path. Feldon isn't a bad card, but it's not an artifact, and we simply have better recursion options in the deck. And then we're adding in Workshop Assistant. Again, it's an artifact, it wants to be sacrificed, and it's a very efficient recursion. And we're going to be taking out Reconstruct History. This card is super mana efficient and very exciting in particular decks, but not here. It's not an artifact, and we have next to no planeswalkers or enchantments, so we're not going to be getting maximum value out of this card. Next, we're going to greatly enhance the deck's card draw. First up, we're going to be adding Mystic Forge, which is an insane card draw engine in this deck. Our deck is loaded with artifact cards and colorless cards that we can play off Mystic Forge, which is going to be just crazy as soon as we put it onto the battlefield. And we're going to be taking out Lelia, the Blade Reforged, a card I like a lot, but not in this deck. It's not an artifact. It's going to have trouble attacking safely into our opponents, and we just lack synergy in the deck for Lelia to really pop off. Everybody knows how busted Skullclamp is, and it's even better in this deck. It's an artifact, so we can easily tutor it up and recur it as needed. We have so many artifacts that want to be sacrificed that we can just clamp onto them first, and then when they die, we draw 2 cards. It's just absurdly good. If Skullclamp isn't exiled from our battlefield, then we basically are going to just drown our opponents in card advantage. And we're going to be taking out Pilgrim's Eye for it. While Pilgrim's Eye is an artifact and is a perfect Skullclamp target, the card itself is just not really good. Just finding a land is very underwhelming for 3 mana, and while it has a lot of inherent synergy in the deck, we can simply do better. Next, we're going to add some really weird spice with Mishra's Bauble. Mishra's Bauble by itself is not really exciting. It's a 0 mana artifact that we can either sacrifice for value or sacrifice itself to draw a card in a delay trigger, but it really shines with our commander Osgir, because we can play it for 0 mana, sacrifice it to draw a card, then exile it with Osgir and make 2 copies of it for 0 mana, and sacrifice those to essentially draw 3 cards for 0 mana with Osgir, which is absolutely insane. We're going to be taking it out for Thopter Engineer. The haste is nice, but just not necessary, and it just doesn't do enough in the deck. And finally, we're adding a card draw card that is really way more than just card draw. It's Ugin the Ineffable, and we really get maximum value out of all aspects of Ugin here. Most of our deck is colorless, so we're going to be getting a ton of ramp out of Ugin's first passive ability. It's also removal, and it can also be incremental card draw, just exiling cards off the top of our library and getting them once we sacrifice the face down token. And we're going to be taking out Jor-Kadeen for it. Jor-Kadeen is a fantastic anthem. It's highly mana efficient at what it does, but we're not a go wide deck, so we're really not going to be getting maximum value out of its ability here. Next, we're going to enhance the deck's ramp. So first off, we're going to be adding Foundry Inspector. Since most of the cards in our deck are artifacts, Foundry Inspector is going to give us at least 1 mana discount each turn, probably 2 or maybe even 3 if we're casting a bunch of spells each turn, so it can get really insane. And we're going to be taking out Horde Smelter Dragon. As I discussed earlier, this deck is loaded with target removal, and I would argue a bit too much. I would prefer actually cutting down on the targeted removal and just focusing on the best options in the deck, and then adding a bunch of tutors, which we just did earlier, to find the best removal options instead. And Horde Smelter Dragon is the weakest of a bunch of targeted removal here. It just costs too much mana to remove artifacts, and the rest of the synergies in the deck are kind of non-existent. Then we're going to be adding one of the best ramp cards for the deck possible. It's Blinkmoth Nexus. In an artifact deck, this is going to make an insane amount of mana for us. It's going to help our opponents too if they have any random artifacts on their battlefield, but we're always going to get way more value out of it. And we're going to be taking out Unstable Obelisk. This is a okay mana rock, and it can also double as removal when you need it, but it's pretty inefficient at both, and the flexibility does not outweigh the fact that it's pretty bad at both things that it does. And then we're going to be adding Boros Signet. This is just a staple ramp option in any Boros deck, and because it's an artifact, it's better in this particular deck. And we're going to be taking out Hedron Archive. Hedron Archive isn't actually that bad in this deck because it does sacrifice itself and there's so much recursion, yada yada, but it's just too inefficient. I'm sorry, friends, even in its best situation, it's still not the best mana rock, so we're going to be cutting it out here. And then we're going to add another fast mana rock with Talisman of Conviction. This is a 2-drop, and it taps for 1 mana, or it mana fixes. It's fantastic. And we're going to be taking out slightly less efficient mana rock option, Boros Locket. Again, both sides of this card is unappealing, and putting it together in one card just doesn't make it good enough. Next, we're adding some Graveyard Hate, and we're adding one of the best Graveyard Hate cards possible, Soul Guide Lantern. It is asymmetrical Graveyard Hate that wipes all your opponent's graveyards while leaving your own graveyard untouched, which is really important because we are a graveyard deck. And it's an artifact, so we can easily tutor it up as well. And we're going to be taking out Rip Apart for it. Rip Apart is a good spell. It's mana efficient, it's flexible. I like both aspects of it, what it does for its mana cost. However, it's not an artifact, and we just have way better synergy options in the deck, so I'm going to be taking it out here. Then we're going to be adding Lodestone Golem, which does serious work in the deck if you've never seen it in action in a commander deck before. It really taxes opponents who aren't entirely focused on artifacts while hardly affecting us at all. So it's a good beater, it can be recurred when needed, it can be tutored up when needed, it ruins your opponent's days, and it doesn't really affect us at all. So it's all upside basically. And we're going to be taking out Return to Dust for it. This is a slightly inefficient removal spell these days. It used to be a classic like a decade ago, but it just doesn't really make the cut anymore, and it's not an artifact, so we just simply have better synergies here. Then we're going to add another mass reanimation staple for the artifact archetype, Scrap Mastery. If ever we're in a situation where we just don't have a board state, maybe our board got wiped recently, we can just mass reanimate all of our artifacts from our graveyard for a low mana cost, which is kind of insane. Or we could even sacrifice all of our artifacts beforehand and then scrap mastery for maximum value. And we're going to be taking out another target removal spell, Darksteel Mutation. This is a fantastic target removal spell. It's especially potent against opposing commanders because it doesn't let them go back to the command zone to be recast. However, it's not an artifact and we have so much target removal in the deck that it's not going to make the cut here. Next, we're going to be swapping out Cleansing Nova for Osgir Command. Cleansing Nova is a fantastic board wipe, however, its flexibility is kind of weaker here because most often we don't want to be wiping the board of all artifacts because we are an artifact deck. Osgir Command, however, can actually wipe the board of enchantments and creatures without actually touching artifacts. So the fact that we can wipe all enchantments from the battlefield without touching our artifacts makes Osgir Command so much better in this particular deck than Cleansing Nova. Finally, we're going to be introducing an alternate win condition into the deck, a combo to the deck. And we're going to be starting off with Lightning Greaves, which in itself doesn't really look like a combo piece, and its primary focus in the deck is actually giving stuff protection from target removal and giving it haste. We have a bunch of creatures that have powerful tap abilities, especially or combat triggers, that we want to give them haste immediately, and especially as an artifact, we can easily tutor it up in this deck. And we're going to be taking out Excavation Technique, another nice target removal spell, but again, our deck is just loaded with target removal. I really wanted to trim it down to only the best cards, and it's not an artifact, so we can't tutor it up when we need it. Now, I said Lightning Greaves is a combo piece, and the reason why it's a combo piece is because its activated ability to equip something is actually 0, and that's going to be highly relevant when we add the other piece of the combo, Crackdown Construct. Now, if you have on the battlefield Lightning Greaves, Crackdown Construct, and another creature, you can move the Lightning Greaves from one creature to the other infinite number of times for 0 mana, and each time you do so, you're going to be giving the Crackdown Construct +1/+1. So the end result is an infinitely large construct. And this deck actually has ways to give it unblockable too. So the end result is a hasty, infinitely large construct that can just one-shot an opponent. Even if your opponent has blockers, this precon has at least 2 ways to give it unblockable, with Rogue's Passage and Key to the City. So even blockers will not save your opponents from the Construct Greaves combo. So we're going to be taking out Bosch Iron Golem for it. Bosch is a sweet card that fits the theme of the deck, but is just too mana efficient these days. It costs a lot of mana, you're probably going to reanimate it instead of paying its mana cost, but even its activated ability just costs too much mana, so we can do simply better in this deck. Finally, we're going to tweak the mana base just a little bit. We have 38 lands, and I'm going to be replacing Temple of the False God for an MDFC instead, Kazul's Fury. This is another way to kill people with the construct. If we have an infinitely large construct, we can kill somebody for lethal with combat damage, and then just fling the construct to kill another person with Kazul's Fury. And then finally, we're swapping out Study Hall for Buried Ruin, which is simply a better land in the deck. We have lots of ways of putting artifacts into our graveyard, and Buried Ruin is just another way to get them back into your hand to replay later. Alright, we talked about the card for card swaps, and now you can see all the cards we're swapping into the deck here. And here's all the cards we're cutting for them. If you're looking for a less expensive upgrade, if $50 is too much, just make less swaps according to your budget and card availability. Finally, here's how the precon looks like with all the swaps made. The deck is now way more powerful thanks to a slimmer mana curve, the introduction of powerful staples, and a pile of sweet tutors to find them. And that's it for my Lorehold Legacies $50 precon upgrade. That's 3 down, 2 to go, so I'll be back soon with the next precon upgrade. Until then, friends, see ya! Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, help us out by clicking the like button down below. And to keep up with the latest and greatest, make sure to click the subscribe button. And if you want to watch similar videos, click on the links appearing on screen right now.